Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10 and a half hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together. Welcome to episode number 4 of the Mother Wit podcast. And a gentle reminder that nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your health care. So I just want to say a few more things about Jae, because since this recording, you have probably seen her name in my newsletters, perhaps on my social media feed. We recorded this prior to her coming to me to talk about being part of my team. And Jae and I talked about a lot of things and both of our goals, and we realized we were pretty well matched, and she has since come on board as my editorial director. She's doing some really great work behind the scenes, and I just want to give her a really big shout out. It feels really good having a team member and somebody to do this with. And here in the next few days, I'm going to have another team member, an intern joining our team. And you'll see that as well in my newsletter and in my social media posts. Perhaps I'll have her on the show one day as well, and you'll get to know her up close and personal. So enjoy today's show with Jae Bratton. Hello, everyone. Today I have with me Jae Bratton. She is a former client. She went through my program, and she's going to tell us a bit about her story. We're going to talk about some interesting aspects of her postpartum journey. Jae, thank you so much for talking with me today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for allowing me to come on here and share my experience.
Yeah, well, I think you have a pretty unique one. So, when I reach out to former clients, I'm definitely looking to highlight some of the pieces that I think our listeners are experiencing themselves, so that they can feel a little bit seen, a little bit heard, and maybe also walk away with some solutions if they're still kind of in it. Like, you're kind of past it now, but you've been there. And I think that these stories really are going to help people who are still pregnant, who might experience some of these things, or who are literally in the thick of it. But before we get started, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, whatever personal details you feel like sharing about your life and your profession and all of that stuff?
Sure. So I'm Jae, as you said. I'm based in North Carolina. I am a teacher. An English teacher. I have a beautiful family. My husband is coincidentally also an English teacher. So my poor son, I mean, we just make him read all the time. We just, you coached me through the delivery and the prenatal period of my first son, who was born in the thick of the pandemic in May.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how old is your baby now?
He's 18 months.
Oh my goodness, time is flying.
It is. I know.
Crazy. So what's it been like working through the pandemic?
I feel like I shouldn't complain, because I'm speaking to you, a healthcare professional, and I think that the burden on you is far greater than it is on me. But it has not been easy teaching during a pandemic. And I said this before, there were really times when I was teaching online to blank screens, because, students don't want to turn their screens on, that, I was crying silently. It was, those first that first 6 months or so, it was not easy.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
had a little baby at that time too.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that was the root of, my tears, that I'm sitting here teaching, which is normally a really fulfilling profession as yours is, but it felt like such a waste of time that I could have been spending with my son,
Yeah. Oh,
you
that
know.
is so crazy. And just I think there are a lot of parallels between teachers and nurses, or midwives are
Mhm.
obviously a subset of people who are similar to nurses, but
Mhm.
people who are on the front lines. I think teachers have become part of the front line in a way we never really understood. And especially now, even though the pandemic has dragged on and we're not in the worst of it, who knows where
Mhm.
we're headed right now, though. But
Right. Right.
the stuff that's going on with school boards and
Mm,
people fighting outside of these meetings, it's like
mm.
you say, I have no right to complain to you. I beg to differ. I think you have a gazillion reasons to complain. It is so hostile of an environment that I can't imagine. I've thought a lot about my teacher friends, trying to uphold whatever standard in a room full of kids whose parents hold that vastly different
Mhm.
values. And I mean, teaching online sounds like it was not a great experience for you, but when I think about going back to the classroom, that's not sounding great right now either.
No, it's not, Tanya, and I see it, every day with my husband. I should say that I since have left my former employer to teach online, like in a proper online setting, not like pandemic online teaching. But my but my husband is still in the classroom, and you know, I see it every day, and it doesn't make me want to go back. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, and just a note on online education. I mean, there's a reason that I do virtual care, and it's
Hmm.
because I actually, this is something I don't think I shared with our listeners before, but I'm a graduate of a distance education midwifery program. I then
Mm,
faculty in that midwifery program, and I'm currently faculty in two midwifery programs, one of which is distance education. So I am
mhm,
a firm believer in online and distance education. I think it
mhm,
can be stellar. I think it can be empowering. I think it can help people develop independent thinking in a way that classroom based programs sometimes can accidentally spoon feed. So I think
mhm,
it's really cool that you have found your way into online education that is intentional, because I think that's the difference. It's like when the pandemic hit, we were flying by the seat of our pants, and to no
mhm,
fault of anyone. But
mhm,
programs, I remember kind of like gloating a tiny bit when the campus-based programs were scrambling. And I was like, I
mhm,
hope people didn't believe in our model for so long. And now
mhm,
here you are, and we're chill, we're good, we've got this, right?
mhm,
So anyway,
mhm,
I'll be looking forward to updates on how you're feeling about teaching in an online program that has intention behind
mhm,
it. Um,
mhm.
Okay, so all right, I'm gonna try to activate a deeper part of my memory, because now that your baby is 18 months old, this is challenging for me. But I think that you actually, even though you had your baby in the thick of it, of the
Mhm,
pandemic, if I'm not
mhm.
mistaken, you became a member in my program before the pandemic, right? Like the pandemic hadn't officially hit yet when you joined this program. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so
Mhm,
what was it? Because for so many of my clients, I got a big boom in the early pandemic, right? But for so many of my clients, they cite the pandemic as kind of a primary reason that they were looking for something like this. And then they
mhm,
cite, well, I'll get into the specific reason that people want this service, because your reason overlaps actually with the most common
mhm,
reason.
mhm.
Um, but I want people to hear about your choice to utilize this program when you didn't even know what was going to happen with the pandemic yet.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So yes, as you said, I we met before the pandemic, or before we knew about the pandemic in America. Um, but as the after the pandemic hit, obviously I was so even more thankful that I had linked up with you, given that in-person care was not really a thing at that point. Um, but the main reason why I found you, I was looking for someone like you, and you turned out to be exactly what I needed. Um, was because I was very aware that postpartum mental health issues were a possibility for me. Going into, before I became pregnant, I knew that I had a history of mental illness. My mother um, suffers from a mental illness as well. And that had a great impact on me. And me being very cerebral and very intentional about everything, before I got pregnant, I did a ton of research. And one of the things I learned is that those women who have histories of mental illness are more susceptible to developing postpartum mental health issues um, after they deliver. So I really wanted someone to be a support for me if that happened to me, and it did.
Yeah, so that's what I was kind of getting ahead of myself a minute ago and almost said, but I wanted you to say it instead. It turns out I've done the statistics on all the people I've worked with since I
Mhm.
started. More than 50% of the people who come to me um, report an underlying mental health problem, and they cite that as their primary reason for investing in this level of support.
Mhm.
And I never saw that coming, right? I'm so interested in so many parts of care and the postpartum experience, all the way through and including like fitness stuff, right? So
Mhm.
I was ready and prepared to work with people through it all. But I could
Mhm.
never have predicted that 50% of those people would say mental health is the primary reason, and that this service provided by a non-therapist turns out to be an incredibly helpful component. So I have a feeling this is something I'm going to be unpacking through numerous episodes. I did talk to in episode number 2 with Sarah Lesko. We talked a bit about this because she has her own mental health issues and is a therapist. So we were able to
Mhm.
kind of talk about that a bit. So
Mhm.
I'm so happy to have you talk about your journey, because I think there are some really unique qualities to your experience. But before we dig too deep into it, I want to ask you if you can remember. So there's something that I remember about you that I literally think of you every time I do a free consult,
Mhm.
because I often find myself explaining the ways in which one could involve their partner in the
Mhm.
program. And for many
Mhm.
people, that's a really attractive component, that I will do an intake on the partner, figure out where their head's at on things. They can come to every session if they want. They can text me if they want. Partners are fully able to be part of the program. In reality, most partners fill out the intake and attend the first couple visits, and then they kind of phase out of it. Many times that's because they've gone back to work or whatever the case may be. So maybe some of them want to be there, but legitimately can't.
Mhm.
But every so often, there is somebody like you who says, you're not going to see my husband. I did this for me. This is me time. And I remember
Mhm.
how clear you were about that. Can you
Mhm.
elaborate on that? Because people don't usually come to it with such clarity, even though they end up landing somewhere that looks much more like what our sessions look like as well.
I mean, so like you said, I bought into your program because for me and my mental health, which I knew would determine the quality of my husband and my son's life in those first months of the postpartum period. What's the saying? Happy wife, happy life. Um, so yeah, I mean, I did it for me. I did it for them too, because I knew that if I was ill, I wouldn't be able to provide the kind of care that I wanted to give my son. Um, but that's not to say that my husband didn't know about the program and that I didn't communicate with him about the things that I was learning from you.
Mm.
I definitely did. There was a session where, you like taught me, okay, here are the signs that you might have postpartum depression. This is how it's different from the baby blues. And you need to tell your husband, hey, this is what you need to look for, which I did. Um, so he was involved to that extent, but I really just wanted you to myself.
So what I'm hearing and finally internalizing, that I guess I've wondered all this time, since I always
Mhm.
recall you in this moment, is this is one of those moments where you put into action that expression about putting on your own oxygen mask first.
Yes.
I finally
Yes.
feel like I understand you, Jay. Like it took me all this time to like, I've literally thought about this so much. And I now get it. I feel like I can summarize it in you were taking care of you so that you could be a good mother, a good wife, and all the other things that you need to be, but you needed to do it this way.
Yes. Yes. And going back to what I said about my family history, I saw how, an ill parent can have a negative effect on children, like in a very real, visceral, personal way.
Mhm.
So,
Was your
yeah,
mom
so
depressed or was she anxious? Would you mind sharing?
both, both
Mhm.
very, very, very severe.
And
Very.
did it start postpartum for her?
So I'm actually adopted. So she never went through a I mean, that's okay. Let me not say that. That's not fair. She did go through a postpartum period, but not natural. She didn't give birth. But hers, she'd really been dealing with it since, from what I understand, her early 20s.
Wasn't something that
Mhm.
started with having a baby, whether it came biologically or not. But you do bring up an amazing point that I want to make sure our listeners know. Um,
Mhm.
Adopted parents can also get postpartum depression.
Yes.
And that's the same logic with which we talk about partners getting postpartum depression, right?
Mhm.
You don't have to go through the physiological process of giving birth to get postpartum depression. So I did remember that you were adopted. In that moment, I wasn't thinking clearly, but nonetheless, it does stand. So you're saying she was depressed and anxious from before gaining you as her child.
Yes, yes. And I
And then
was
it's really
with it.
interesting though, because there is a genetic predisposition, I guess is the word I should use.
Mhm.
And we're not talking about that right now. So this is where like nature versus nurture really comes in. And some
Mhm.
people are dealing with both nature and nurture, right? We know that
Mhm.
you're dealing with only one side of that, and it's still
Mhm.
really impactful, right? Yeah, it impacted you greatly. It impacted all of your choices around how and when to have a baby and how you were going to go about it. Okay.
Yes.
So the thing also that I'm going to let you tell this part of the story, but I just want to clue you into where I'm going.
Mhm.
Um, I talk a lot about managing sleep, and I
Mhm.
talk about it with people starting while they're pregnant all the way through the postpartum period, because there's a relationship between sleep and mental health, right? Um, Jay
Mhm.
had a particularly, I think, interesting experience of having trouble with sleep, as it also overlapped with how she ended up evolving into understanding what was going on with her mental health. Can you recall that experience? Because I think it started pretty quickly after the birth. Am I remembering it correctly?
It did.
Mhm.
It did. Um, so going into the postpartum period, those first weeks, the first week or two, I was hyper vigilant, I think to my detriment, where I was just constantly on high alert. Like, I got to make sure I'm getting enough sleep because I know that sleep is connected to mental health issues, as you said. Um, and I was putting so much pressure on myself to get sleep that I really think it backfired. I didn't trust in my ability to function, with less sleep than I had been getting. I didn't trust in knowing that eventually I was going to be sleeping. And I get plenty of sleep now. Um, and yeah, so I was just, I mean, I don't know if this is the proper term for it, Tanya, but I definitely had sleep anxiety, and I just worked myself up to the point where I wasn't sleeping. I
Yeah.
wasn't.
Well, I think I don't know whether that's a proper thing or not, but I like it. Sleep anxiety. I
Mhm.
was thinking just more straightforwardly that you had insomnia, but the insomnia itself was caused by feeling anxious, right?
Definitely,
And I'm
definitely.
somebody who cannot take a daytime nap to save my life, right? Like
Mhm,
it is
mhm,
not happening. It has only ever happened a small number of times in my life, and I have to have a pocket of time that is really undefined. So if somebody
Mhm.
says you have an hour to take a nap, go take it. I'm like, go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep. And it makes me
Exactly.
crazy. Otherwise, I don't have any trouble sleeping. So I can relate to what you were experiencing because I would draw on that experience of mine. But I remembered that you started messaging me pretty early about just this inability to fall asleep and feeling super anxious about it. I
Mhm.
also wondered if I contributed to it a little bit because I was teaching you about sleep, but I haven't had this kind of thing repeat. And most of the time it's helpful. And we really did get ourselves to the bottom of it. So, I don't know if we'll ever know. Like, if we hadn't talked about sleep before, would you have had sleep anxiety? I'm not sure.
No, well, definitely none of the blame can be placed on your feet. Yeah, that's part of my personality.
Mhm,
I'm an overthinker. I'm a naturally anxious person.
mhm,
Um, but part of it too, and I don't think I ever mentioned this to you, Tanya. I mean, when I look back at that period, and I'm talking like the first week, the first couple days of postpartum, I can see that I was developing anxiety around being a new mother.
mm.
And I think that eventually fed into the sleep anxiety. And then it just became just an endless cycle.
It became the focal point of your anxiety. It gave you something to be specifically anxious about, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. Like, yes, yes. And plus on top of that, again, I was just anxious about not getting sleep.
Right.
So
You
yeah.
would worry in advance of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah, like, oh, the end of the day is coming. I won't be able to sleep.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember
Yeah.
that. I remember us texting
Mm,
back and forth about that because what we
mm,
did in terms of order of events, right, was address the fact that there are a couple different ways that people can feel some relief from what starts to feel like anxiety when it's not real anxiety, but it's really just sleep deprivation. I say that
mhm,
very gently because obviously it's very gray, but
mhm,
sleep deprivation in and of itself starts to look like anxiety in many new parents. At least that's what I see. And so
mhm,
there's a
mhm,
point at which I'll encourage people to try to accumulate 8 hours of sleep inside of every 24-hour period. I
mhm,
also know that that's not reasonable and that most people won't get it. But my theory is aim high, right? Because if
mhm,
you tell people what you really want, they're going to go lower than that probably. So I aim
mhm,
for 8 and I hope for 6 is kind of where it lands.
mhm,
Now,
mhm,
that might come in 3 2-hour naps just to keep the math simple,
mhm,
right? And for
mhm,
some people, I start to see the anxiety fade as they get through a few days where they accumulated 6 to 8 hours of sleep, let's say. But every so
mhm,
often that doesn't work well. And so what we do then is we say, all right, that's not sufficient. For your brain chemistry, it may be the case that you need 4 hours of sleep at a pop, and that a connected 4 hours of sleep might finally flip that switch and make you feel a little more sane. And so you and I played with those strategies, but they didn't go over as well with you as they have with many other people because it didn't matter. Every time you got woken up to breastfeed or whatever it was, you were starting over again, right?
mhm, mhm. Yeah, no, you're right. I remember, well, oh gosh, this is such a long time ago, but yes, I do remember us, you checking in on me and you're like, how did it go? And I was like, yeah, no, there was a night where I got like a 4 hour stretch of sleep, but, in the end, I needed medication. I mean, like you said, it didn't matter. I don't think it mattered. The
Right.
two, the three, the four,
Right. And
you
so
know,
we rolled through slowly upping the ante on the medications to figure out what you were going to need. So I'm assuming we started with like, let's try some Benadryl. Let's see how that goes. Right.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
we kind of upped the ante to like, what did you do next? Was it like Visceral or something?
I'm going to mispronounce this, Tanya, but I think it was hydroxyzine.
Yeah, that's the same drug. So yeah, just generic names and brand
Okay.
names.
Okay.
So they
Mhm.
did that. So we were basically trying the like, can we get you over the hump with something you can take occasionally, right?
Yep.
That's
Yep.
basically the strategy. So for our listeners, what we're talking through right now is like, if you are somebody who is anxious, or if you are a bad sleeper or whatever, this is kind of a process that you can talk to your provider about or at least just have kind of laid out in your own mind so that you don't jump from A to Z, but you kind of try all the
Mhm.
things and you move yourself through it. When the occasional, you would get a little bit of a benefit from one of the drugs. I think like Benadryl didn't touch you, but the other one might have, I can't quite remember.
Yeah.
But it wasn't enough. And
Mhm.
once you got started on something that you took every single day, this all
Mhm.
slowly faded away. You had to wait out that couple of weeks, I think,
Mhm.
before you got the
Mhm.
real benefit. But I remember the relief that you
Mm.
finally had. You were like, ah, the clouds parted and everything
Yeah.
was better.
Yeah. And, I want to comment on what you were saying about that process. Like, that is exactly why I wanted this program. I mean, my worst fear really came true. I developed a postpartum, mental illness, but you were there 24/7 um, to answer any of my questions. You are with all of your experience, you walked me through, hey, you might want to think about this and ask your provider this. And it's exactly what I needed.
Well, and you had a great provider, and I can't say that for all of my clients, but I felt that your provider was very responsive.
Yes.
You had multiple video sessions with your OB, right, about your mental health.
Yes.
Which I'm hard pressed to remember off the top of my head how many of my other clients OBs were that responsive to a mental
Mm,
health issue. I could probably pull up 10 names right now of people who will tell me outright that they were dismissed, right? So
mm,
then I didn't know whether you would get such great attention. And so we talked about things like Postpartum Support International and how you might be
mhm,
able to call on them for help if your
mhm,
provider didn't feel confident or capable of making these
mhm,
decisions. And you didn't need any of that. They were great.
mhm,
So I feel like this is a case where the teamwork between your virtual team and your in-person team really went really
mhm.
well. And it was also gray in terms of who was in person and who was virtual because everything was virtual then.
Yes.
You had a virtual 6-week visit, all that stuff was virtual.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
I should say, Tanya, she's not an OB, she's a midwife too.
You had a midwife. Yay. That's why it was so great.
That's why. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That also reminds me when I think about statistics, very few people use my service who have a local midwife. There have been a handful, but most of my clients have an OB. And I think on some level, I hate that I talk badly about OBs on my podcast. I don't mean to. But
Mhm,
OBs tend to be a bit more authoritarian,
mhm,
and don't necessarily give people as much time and attention as midwives. So that just
mhm.
came full
Yep.
circle for me, right?
Yep.
Like completely
Yep.
forgot that you had midwifery care. Super duper.
I
Love
did.
it. Yay, midwives. Okay. Um, so very cool. How are you doing now at this point? Like, do you mind my asking, are you still on medication? Do you feel like you still need it?
Um, I'm doing great. I am still on medication. It does make me nervous to think about not, because those first 6 weeks of the postpartum period were bad. They were bad. And I never want to go back there again. Um, but yes, I mean, I'm happy I'm taking the medication that we eventually decided on, and I sleep extremely well. My son sleeps extremely well. I'm a huge napper. But no, I really am doing great. Like I said, after those first 6 weeks and that medicine started to get in my system, I felt like myself again.
It's funny you reminding me this story. And again, we both recalled that it started very quickly with you. That's
Hmm.
something else that makes your story really different than many of my other clients. I have had a lot of clients whose postpartum anxiety or depression or both didn't really kick in till about 12 weeks. I'm starting to feel like I see a pattern of right around the time this program is wrapping up. Um,
Mm,
People kind of the other shoe drops at that point
mm,
have enough data to make any guesses about this, but the thought has occurred to me that sometimes this layer of support might be keeping something at bay. And then as it fades away, then there's a shift. And so I've really tried to address that by shifting the way the program works, making it a monthly subscription program so that the client cuts the cord instead of me cutting the cord. There have been a lot of changes
mhm,
over time because of that. But that's another way in which your situation was so unique. It was the first 6 weeks that were tough. And then
mhm,
things got much easier. Now,
Mhm. Mhm.
did you have any other major speed bumps at all? Because if I recall, breastfeeding went really easy for you. You had a relatively smooth birth. Like, you didn't have
Mhm.
any other big obvious hiccups. Was there anything that I'm not remembering?
No, no, you're so right. I mean, in the last couple months, I've kind of come up with this saying to myself. I had a very difficult childhood, but have the easiest kid. So it kind of balanced out.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, he nursed great. I'm still nursing him now.
Yay.
Um, there was never any issues of like nipple confusion or bottle refusal or tongue tie, none of that. I mean, the sleep transitioning him into his own room was easy. I mean, everything else was fine.
You know,
Really.
that's one of the things that I talk to people about a lot is that, every so often when somebody has a particular postpartum difficulty, I'll say, sometimes someone will say, I wish I had known more about this before. And I feel really torn as a healthcare provider because I cannot, no one can, and nor do I deeply believe that we should sit down and tell someone all the horrible things that could happen while you're still pregnant. That just doesn't
Mhm.
sound pleasant to me. So
Mhm.
we do our best to give people kind of an overview of the major themes that are, or common
Mhm.
themes, I should say, but
Mhm.
none of us can predict what's
Mhm.
going to come for you. And that's why I want to work with people while they're still pregnant, even when they are
Mhm.
coming to me with the goal of focusing on their postpartum care, right? And
Mhm.
so I guess my question to you is, the mental health thing was forefront of your mind, but were there
Mhm.
other things that you thought were highly likely to go wrong but didn't go wrong? Like, were you preparing for other things and then you were like, ah, none of that happened to me and that was a waste of time?
Yes, yes, there was. And I think this was, if I had a moment, like a light bulb moment where I was like, okay, I'm all in with Tanya. I'm gonna buy into this program. Um, I had the thought when I was still carrying my son, obviously, I was like, what if I just can't get him to stop crying? Like, and I didn't have a lot of experience with little kids before I got pregnant. I mean, I never babysat kids ever. So I'm not one of those like, baby whispers. And I was like, oh my, I don't know if we can curse on this podcast, but in my head, like, oh shit, what if I can't get him to stop crying? So I was like, I need Tanya. I need someone who I can just text and be like, what do I do?
Yeah.
But that actually didn't end up happening. He was a super, super easy baby to soothe and care for and just very relaxed. But yeah, I mean, but this is the other thing about your program. Just it was just worth it to buy into, knowing that I had you on call if something were to happen.
Right.
Like the mental security that you gave me, I mean, it was priceless. I mean, even though, we did say this toward the end of the program, like you definitely stopped hearing from me toward the end, like when things like really smoothed out. But that doesn't mean I wasn't getting what I paid for. I mean, just like I said, just knowing that I could ask you anything, any question, it made it all worth it.
Well, and that's actually contributed to the ways in which I've tried to evolve the program to suit the needs of people. So now, because it's paid for on a monthly basis instead of, a big fee for 4 months of care, people
Uh-huh.
can transition. So for some people, texting is the primary piece that they love. But I'm not going to
Mhm.
text with people who I don't have a really good foundation with, right? So I don't
Mhm.
let people start that way. But once we've developed a rapport,
Mhm.
if the face-to-face sessions are not what people need, they can reduce their plan to just a texting only. And for people who the sessions themselves are what are most valuable, but they're not big texters, they can turn off the program and just schedule visits as needed. So I'm trying to
Mhm.
make sure I accommodate people in all the ways that they need support. And I don't want people to pay for things that they don't need to utilize, right? So it's a work
Mhm.
in progress for sure. I'm still just really listening to people and figuring out what the needs of each individual are and how can I support people on that path.
Mhm.
But yeah, Jay, thank you so much
Mhm.
for sharing your story, because I really think that it's common to have some issues with sleep. Almost everyone needs a few tidbits of very specific advice in those first few weeks. But your case was really, you were definitely on the extreme side of sleep stuff. So I really wanted to share your story with people, because I can't imagine that you're alone. Even though I've only seen it up close and personal one time with you, I have no doubt you are not alone. And I think people will come out of the woodwork and say, I had that same experience. And hopefully we're going to hear from the community all the different ways that got managed, or maybe mismanaged, or not managed at all. But I think those stories are really important. So I really wanted to put yours out there and spotlight it so we can hear from others. I want to be even more prepared for the next mama that comes my way that has a version of what you have had, as you have labeled sleep anxiety, which I will now look up to see if therapists use this word or not, but I like it.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me and letting me share my story. That's another beautiful thing about your program. I mean, there were so many times where you validated my experience and just made me feel not alone, made me feel like I wasn't crazy, so.
Well, that's what postpartum people need in the modern world, because one of the unfortunate consequences of transitioning to nuclear families, and then whatever you call what we usually do these days, which I don't even think quite qualifies as nuclear anymore for many of us, it's that we don't see people giving birth close by us. We don't see people breastfeeding. We don't see a tired mother trying to put her baby to bed. We don't see it all happening. And so we have so little frame of reference of what's normal. And that's what I feel I'm holding the space for, and what I really want to share with the world. And a big motivator of this podcast is really just sharing all the unique stories that I've gathered from those of you who have been brave enough and open enough to share your journey with me. So thank you so much. Jae, stay in touch, okay?
Yes, ma'am. Always.
All right. Talk to you soon. Hey everyone, it's me, Tanya, your host here at the Mother Wit podcast. You know, I sometimes invite my clients on the show to talk about their birth stories and postpartum experiences, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what those clients and I actually do together. I started Mother Wit to help people in the perinatal period achieve their health and wellness goals. That means whether you're hoping to conceive and struggling with high blood pressure or high blood sugar, or you're having trouble managing anxiety or depression in the postpartum period, or maybe you just need support and advocacy between prenatal or postpartum visits, I can help. Get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. I'm looking forward to working with you and maybe having you on the show too.